The new black sedan pulled away from the curb, its tires silent on the old, cracked asphalt. My son, Lowell, didn't look back. The man who had once fished with me on the lake, the boy who had once called me his hero, was now a stranger. He was in his new car, leaving the house he had just had me thrown out of. I stood on the dusty lawn, the only thing of mine left, and watched until the car was a speck, then gone. My hand, the one that had held his as a boy, now clutched an old rusted key, its teeth worn from years of use. My shoulders felt heavy, weighed down not by the eviction notice in my other hand, but by the crushing weight of betrayal. A tear I hadn't known was coming traced a path through the dust on my cheek. He was begging for this key 3 days later, but by then it was already too late. The coffee maker gurgled, a rhythmic comfort against the quiet of the house. I was in the kitchen, half listening to the radio, when the news came. Lowell called, his voice a frantic mixture of disbelief and euphoria. "Dad, you won't believe it. 61 million. We're set for life, Dad." The whole family's set. I remember the sound of my wife, Maribel, stirring in the other room, the soft rustle of her blankets. She had been sick for years, a gentle fading that had turned our world to grayscale. Lowell's call was a sudden burst of color. The first thing he said was, "Now we can finally get Mom the care she needs. The best doctors, the best hospice. Whatever she wants, Dad." He swore up and down that he'd take care of us. Not just us, but the house, the bills, everything. I remember feeling a weight lift from my chest that day, a burden I hadn't realized was so heavy. We were all going to be okay. That promise, whispered over a crackling phone line, became the last good memory I had of my son. It was a promise built on a lie, a foundation of false hope that would soon shatter. Maribel passed away 2 months later, her last words being a soft, "Take care of him, Oswin." I didn't know then that the person I needed to protect him from was himself. The funeral was a quiet affair, a mix of old friends and distant relatives. Lowell stood beside me, his arm around my shoulder, but his eyes were already elsewhere. The inheritance had changed him, not in a loud or flashy way at first, but in a quiet, subtle shift. He stopped answering my calls as quickly. His texts became short, one-word responses. He was no longer the boy who promised me the world, but a man in a new suit, looking at a horizon I couldn't see. The funeral was a blur of black suits and solemn faces, but the silence between us was what I remember most. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a chasm that had opened between a father and son. I tried to bridge it, to reach across the divide, but he was already gone. He was in a different world, a world where promises were as disposable as paper cups. I was still in the old one, a world of grief and faded memories. It was a world he had already abandoned, a world he no longer had any use for. The call from his new lawyer was the first real sign, a sterile, cold voice on the other end of the line, asking me to confirm my identity. The questions were clinical, distant, and the man on the other end of the line was a stranger. He told me that my son was taking over the financial affairs of the estate, that he was making sure everything was in order. I told him that everything was already in order, that I didn't need any help, but he just said, "Mr. Lyle, this is just a formality." I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I should have seen the red flags. The way he spoke, the way he avoided my questions, the way he seemed to be in a hurry to get off the phone. It was a prelude to the betrayal that was coming, a warning sign I was too blind to see. It was a sign that my son was no longer my son, but a man who was obsessed with money and power. Lowell came to the house a week later. He wasn't alone. His new wife, Julene, a sleek, sharp woman I'd only met once, was with him. Her eyes were hard and cold, and she looked at the house as if it were a monument to everything she hated. She looked at me the same way. The air in the living room was thick with unspoken tension, the silence more deafening than any argument. Lowell stood in the middle of the room, his hands in his pockets, his posture stiff and unnatural. He looked at me not with love or affection, but with the cold, calculating eyes of a businessman. He was no longer my son, but a stranger in my own home, a visitor who was just waiting for the right moment to leave. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something was terribly wrong. He cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound that was out of place in his new persona. "Dad," he started, "Julene and I have been talking. You need a place that's, easier to manage. We found a nice apartment for you in town." The words were hollow, the sentiment forced. I looked at him, at the stranger who had replaced my son, and felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. "Lowell, this is my home," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Your mother and I built this house with our own 2 hands. I'm not leaving." He didn't respond, just looked at the floor, and Julene stepped in. Her voice was like glass, sharp and brittle. Look, Oswin, we're doing this for your own good. It's too much for you now. The stairs, the maintenance, the yard work. It's all too much. She didn't say it, but I could hear the unspoken words in her voice. You're too old. You're a burden. It was a betrayal more painful than any knife, a wound that cut deeper than any physical injury. I was being thrown out of my own home, by my own son, and there was nothing I could do. The paperwork was on the table, a stack of papers that looked innocent enough, a stack of papers that would change my life forever. Lowell took one out of the pile, a single sheet of paper with my name on it. He slid it across the table, his hand trembling slightly. Just sign it, Dad, he said, his voice pleading. It's for the best. I didn't need to read it to know what it was. I knew. I had a feeling. I had a feeling that this was the end of our relationship, the end of my life as I knew it. He was asking me to sign away everything I had ever known, everything I had ever loved. He was asking me to sign away my memories, my past, my future. He was asking me to sign away my life. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I looked at him, and I knew that he was a stranger. The air in the living room had grown thick, the silence now a living thing, a predator stalking us all. I pushed the papers away, the motion a quiet defiance. I'm not signing anything, Lowell. This is my home. My voice was a low rumble, but it carried a weight that made Julene flinch. She shot a look at Lowell, a silent command. He sighed, a sound of frustration and impatience. Dad, we've talked about this. It's for your own good. His words were like little ice shards, each one a tiny stab. You can't keep this place up. It's too big. The taxes are too high. He was talking about the house as if it were a burden, a thing to be discarded. It wasn't just a house. It was the walls Maribel and I had painted, the floorboards we'd worn smooth with our footsteps, the garden where she'd grown the hydrangeas she loved so much. It was the monument to our life together. Julene stepped forward, her perfectly manicured hand reaching for the stack of papers. She pulled out a single sheet, a crisp, official-looking document, with a heading that made my blood run cold. Notice of eviction. You don't understand, Oswin, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. This isn't a request. Lowell had to take legal action to protect his investment. We gave you a choice. My head snapped to Lowell. He wouldn't meet my eye. The color had drained from his face, leaving him pale and gaunt. He looked like a child caught in a lie. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, a jarring sound in the heavy silence. My voice was a whisper, but it was filled with the rage of a man who had lost everything. You own this house? I asked, the words feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. He nodded, a small, pathetic motion. The papers were put in my name after Mom, after she died. The will. It was all in her name. He didn't need to say anything more. I knew he had taken advantage of my grief, of my weakness, to seize the one thing I had left. The one thing that held my past, my present, and my future. I walked to the front door, the eviction notice crumpled in my hand. I didn't say another word. I couldn't. The words were all stuck in my throat, a lump of grief and anger that I couldn't swallow. I opened the door, a silent invitation for them to leave. They didn't move at first, just stood there, watching me. Dad, please, Lowell said, his voice cracking. I shook my head, my eyes burning with unshed tears. You're not my son anymore, I said. The words a gravestone, a final epitaph to a relationship that had died a long time ago. He flinched, as if I had struck him, and his face crumbled. But Julene, ever the cold and calculating one, grabbed his arm and pulled him towards the door. She looked at me one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. This is what you get, old man, her eyes seemed to say. You should have just taken the apartment. They were gone a moment later, the sound of their new car a low hum that faded into the distance. I stood in the doorway, the eviction notice a crumpled ball of paper in my hand, and looked out at the street that had been my home for 50 years, the street that was no longer mine. I spent the next few hours in a daze, walking through the empty rooms, touching the furniture, the paintings, the photos. Each object was a memory, a ghost of a life that was now gone. I looked at the rocking chair in the corner, the one where Maribel used to sit and read, and I could almost see her there, her face a serene smile. I looked at the old grandfather clock in the hallway, its pendulum swinging back and forth, counting the moments of a life that was now over. I looked at the old photographs on the mantelpiece, the ones of a younger Lowell, his face full of a carefree joy that had been replaced by a cold ambition. I felt a crushing weight of sadness, a sorrow so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. I was alone in a house that was no longer mine, with nothing but ghosts for company. The house had become a mausoleum, a tomb for a life that was no more. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, the eviction notice lying on the floor, a white stain in the blackness. I thought about Lowell, about his promise, about the way he had looked at me with such cold indifference. I thought about Maribel, about her last words, about her unspoken fear. I thought about the house, about the life we had built together, about the memories we had made. And I thought about the boat, the old rusty boat that was sitting in the back shed, the boat that Maribel and I had been working on for years, the boat that was the last thing I had left. I had a feeling, a deep, unsettling feeling, that there was something more to this, something more than a son's betrayal, something more than a greedy wife, something more than a simple eviction. I felt that there was a secret hidden somewhere in the boat, a secret that Maribel had left for me to find, a secret that would change everything. I got up from the chair, my legs stiff and sore from sitting for so long. I picked up the eviction notice and looked at it one last time before crumpling it up again and throwing it in the trash. I didn't need it. I didn't need their permission to leave. I would leave on my own terms. I would leave with my head held high. But I wasn't just leaving. I was going to find out the truth. I was going to find out what had really happened. I was going to find out what Maribel had been hiding. I was going to find out why Lowell had betrayed me. I was going to find out why he had been so obsessed with money. And I was going to find out what had happened to my life. I was going to the shed, to the boat, to find the answers. I had a feeling that the answers were there. I had a feeling that the truth was hidden in plain sight. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning. The shed smelled of sawdust and aged wood, a comforting scent that was a stark contrast to the sterile emptiness of the house. I flicked on the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, its weak light casting long, dancing shadows. The boat sat in the middle of the room, hulking shape draped in a tarp. It was a sailboat, an old one, a classic beauty with a keel that had seen better days. Maribel and I had bought it years ago, a foolish impulse buy that had become a passion project. We had spent weekends here, sanding down the hull, painting the deck, dreaming of the day we would finally launch it. It was the last thing we had worked on together, the last thing we had shared. It was a symbol of our love, of our dreams, of our life together. Now it was just a symbol of the dreams that had been lost. I pulled the tarp off, the fabric making a soft sighing sound as it fell to the floor. The boat was still there, still waiting. I climbed inside, the familiar feel of the wood under my hand, a comfort I hadn't realized I was craving. The boat was a sanctuary, a place where I could be alone with my memories. I sat in the cockpit, my fingers tracing the outline of the old steering wheel, and I remembered Maribel. I remembered her laugh, a soft, lilting sound that could fill a room with light. I remembered her smile, a shy, gentle curve of her lips. I remembered the way her eyes would light up when she talked about the boat, about the places we would go, the adventures we would have. We had planned to sail down the coast, to see the world, to live a life of freedom and adventure, but her illness had put an end to all that. The dreams were still there, still waiting, but the dreamer was gone. I felt a familiar pang of grief, a hollow ache in my chest that had been there since the day she died. I was not just here for memories, though. I was here for answers. I remembered the last time I was here with her, a few weeks before she passed away. She had been weak, her body failing, but her eyes had been sharp and clear. She had pointed to a small wooden panel in the side of the cockpit, a panel I had never noticed before. "Oswin," she had whispered, her voice barely a breath, "there's a secret I've kept from you to protect you. Don't open it until you're sure you need it, until everything else is gone." I had dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just the ramblings of a sick woman, but now I knew. She had been trying to warn me. She had been trying to save me. I ran my hand along the wood, my fingers searching for the panel. I found it, a small, square panel that was almost invisible against the grain of the wood. It was a secret compartment, a secret she had been keeping for a long time. I pried it open, the sound of the wood groaning a loud protest in the quiet shed. Inside there was a small locked box, a plain, wooden box with a small brass lock. The lock was old, the brass tarnished with age. I had no idea what was inside, but I had a feeling that it was important. I had a feeling that it was the key to everything. I tried to pry it open, but the lock was solid. I tried to pick it with a nail, but it was no use. I didn't have the key. I didn't have the tools. I was at a dead end. I was so close, and yet so far away. I felt a wave of frustration and despair wash over me. I had lost my home, my family, my wife. The only thing I had left was this boat, this box, and this secret. And now I couldn't even open the box. It was a cruel joke, a cosmic prank, played on a man who had already lost everything. The air in the shed was getting cold, the sun was setting, and the shadows were getting longer. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I had no money, no home, no family. I was a man without a country, a ghost in my own life. I had to leave. I had to find a way to survive. I had to find a way to open this box. I had to find a way to get my life back. I took the box with me, holding it close to my chest like a precious artifact. It was the only thing I had left in the world, the only thing that mattered, the only thing that could save me. I walked out of the shed and closed the door behind me. I looked at the house one last time, a dark shape against the dying light of the sun. It was no longer my home. It was just a house. And the boat, the one thing that I had left, was now a sanctuary. A place where I could be safe. A place where I could finally find the truth. The truth that had been hidden from me for so long. The truth that had been waiting for me to find it. The street lights of downtown cast a sickly yellow glow on the rain-slicked pavement. I walked with my head down, the weight of the old guitar case in my hand a familiar burden. It was my father's guitar, a beat-up old acoustic that had been the soundtrack to my childhood. It was a symbol of a time when life was simple, when a song on the porch was all the entertainment we needed. Now it was just an object, a thing to be sold for a few dollars. I hated myself for it, for having to do this, for having to sell a piece of my past just to survive. But I had no choice. I had no home, no money, no future. I was just a ghost in a world that had moved on without me. The pawn shop was a small, cluttered place with a bell that jingled every time the door opened. The man behind the counter, a tired-looking man with a mustache, looked at me with a weary sympathy that made my skin crawl. He knew what I was. He knew what I had become. He took the guitar, his fingers running over the worn fretboard, a silent assessment. He strummed a few chords, the sound a hollow, mournful echo in the quiet shop. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "You sure about this, old man?" he asked. His voice was low and quiet, but it was filled with a kindness that was more painful than any insult. I nodded, a small, jerky motion. "I don't have a choice," I said, my voice a whisper. He nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. He gave me $100, a paltry sum for a lifetime of memories. But it was enough. It was enough for a motel room for a night. Enough for a meal. Enough to get me to the next day. I took the money, my hand trembling as I held it. It felt like blood money. It felt like I was selling a piece of my soul. I walked out of the pawn shop, the door jingling behind me, the sound a final farewell to a life that was now gone. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a place with a neon sign that flickered like a dying heart. The room was small and smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. I put the money on the nightstand, a small, pathetic pile of bills. It was a testament to how far I had fallen, a testament to how much I had lost. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap mattress sagging under my weight, and looked at my phone. I had one number left to call, one person who might be able to help me. I had met him years ago, a young lawyer who had helped me with a small legal dispute. He had given me his card, a crisp white square with his name and number on it. He had told me to call him if I ever needed anything, and I had a feeling that I needed him now more than ever. His name was Trina, a woman who seemed to know the dark underbelly of the legal world. I dialed the number, my finger hovering over the call button for a long moment. I felt a pang of shame, a sense of embarrassment that I had to ask for help. But I had no choice. I had to do this. For Maribel, for myself. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when a voice answered, a voice that was both tired and kind. "Trina, who is this?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "It's Oswin Lyle," I said. "You helped me with a legal matter a few years ago, about that property line dispute." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought she had hung up. "Oswin," she said, her voice a low, knowing sound. "I remember. What can I do for you?" I told her everything. The eviction, Lowell's betrayal, the boat, the locked box. I told her about the crumpled eviction notice, the pawned guitar, the desperate call. I told her that I had a feeling that something was wrong, that something was missing. I told her about the secret Maribel had left me and the box I couldn't open. She listened in silence, her quiet breathing the only sound on the line. When I was done, she was silent for a long time. "Oswin," she said, her voice filled with a quiet sympathy. "This is bad. This is really bad. I can't promise you anything. This is a long shot, but I'll do what I can. I'll need some more information from you, though. The name of the property, the will, anything you have. I told her that I had nothing, that everything was in the house. She sighed. That's a problem, she said. But don't worry. I'll get to the bottom of this. Just stay put. I'll be in touch. I hung up the phone, a small flicker of hope in my heart. But it was a small flicker. A small flicker in a dark, empty room. And I knew that it could be extinguished at any moment. I didn't know if she could help me. I didn't know if she would help me. I didn't know if she could even find the truth. I was a man who had lost everything, and all I had left was a locked box and a long shot. I spent the next day trying to open the locked box, using a variety of tools I bought with the pawn shop money. A hammer, a chisel, a screwdriver. Nothing worked. The lock was solid. The wood was old and strong. It was as if Maribel had built it to withstand the apocalypse. I knew I couldn't break it. I would have to find the key. The key was probably in the house, in a secret drawer, in a hidden compartment, in a place only she would know about. But I couldn't go back. Not yet. I was a fugitive in my own life, a man on the run from his own son. I felt a wave of helplessness, a feeling that I was trapped in a nightmare from which I could not wake up. The motel room felt like a cage, the walls closing in on me. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I was alone. I sat on the bed, the locked box on the floor, and tried to think. I tried to remember. I closed my eyes and tried to go back in time, to the last few months of Maribel's life. I remembered the strange conversations we had, the ones that had seemed so random at the time, but now, in retrospect, seemed to be filled with a hidden meaning. She had been worried about money, about the bills, about the future. She had been worried about Lowell, about his ambition, about his greed. She had been worried about me, about my health, about my happiness. She had been worried about everything. I remembered one conversation in particular, a cold winter night, a few weeks before she passed. She had woken up in the middle of the night, a terrified look on her face. "Oswin," she had whispered, her voice a trembling sound. "I've made a terrible mistake. I've been talking to Jareth. He's a monster. He's gonna ruin us all." I had dismissed it at the time, a nightmare, a fever dream. But now, I knew. She had been trying to warn me. She had been trying to tell me. Jareth. The name echoed in my mind. Jareth. Who was he? What had he done? What had she done? I had a feeling that he was the key to everything. I spent the rest of the day in a blur of memories, trying to piece together the puzzle of Maribel's last few months. I remembered the way she had been so secretive, the way she had been so worried. I remembered the way she had spent hours on the phone, her voice a low, secretive whisper. I remembered the way she had been so protective of her journal, the small leather-bound book she carried with her everywhere. The journal, the one thing I couldn't find, the one thing that might have the answers, the one thing that might have the key to the box. I felt a pang of despair. It was all a dead end. There were no clues, no answers, no hope. I was a man lost in a sea of grief and betrayal, with nothing but a locked box and a memory of a name. I was a man who had been abandoned by his family, a man who had been betrayed by his son, a man who had been left to die alone. I was about to give up, to throw the box away and just walk into the night and never look back, when I remembered. I remembered the day before she died. She had been weak, her body failing, her mind a blur of memories. But for a few moments she had been clear. She had looked at me with a love so pure and so deep it had taken my breath away. "Oswin," she had whispered, her voice barely audible, "I've left you a message. In the last place you'd ever look. A place where you'll find everything you need. A place that's a part of our love story." I had kissed her, a silent promise to find it. I had forgotten. I had been so lost in grief, so lost in my own pain, that I had forgotten her last message. But now I remembered the last place you'd ever look. The boat. The boat was the last place I would ever look. It was the place where our love story had begun, and it was the place where it would end. I knew then that the key was in the boat. I knew that the answers were there. I knew that the truth was waiting for me. I had to go back. I had to go back to the shed. I had to go back to the boat. I had to find the key. I had to find the truth. I had a feeling that the key was in the boat, in a secret compartment, in a place only she would know about. The only thing I didn't know was where. The rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that matched the mood of the day. I walked for hours, the locked box heavy in my hands, until I reached the familiar sight of Cassidy's place. It was a small, ramshackle house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a tangle of rusted cars and discarded machinery. Cassidy was a man I had known for 30 years, a man who had seen me through thick and thin. He was a man who didn't ask questions, who just gave you a beer and a place to crash. I knocked on the door, the sound a loud report in the quiet night. He opened the door, a look of surprise on his face. "Oswin," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What in the world are you doing here?" I told him everything: the eviction, Lowell's betrayal, the boat, the locked box, the phone call to Trina. I didn't leave anything out. He listened in silence, his face a mask of concern. When I was done, he just nodded. "Come on in, old man," he said, his voice soft. "You look like you've been to hell and back." He gave me a beer, a cold, refreshing liquid that soothed the raw anger in my throat. We sat on his porch, the rain a soft patter on the roof, the quiet hum of the night a gentle background noise. "I don't know what to tell you, Oswin," he said, his voice a low, thoughtful sound. "I'm sorry. I really am, but I can't help you with the boat. I can't help you with the box. But I can tell you something about that land you're on." I looked at him, a flicker of hope in my heart. "What do you mean?" I asked. He took a long drink of his beer. "Years ago," he said, "before Maribel got sick, I was working on a construction job for a big developer, a man named Jareth. He was building a new subdivision, a big fancy place with fancy houses and fancy names. He was trying to buy up all the land in the area, all the old farms and homesteads. He offered me a lot of money to sell my place, but I told him to go to hell. I'm not selling my family's land to some slick city boy." But he didn't give up. He was a persistent son of a gun. He was obsessed with that land. He was obsessed with your land. My heart started to pound in my chest. Jareth, the name Maribel had whispered on her deathbed. The name that had been haunting me for days. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "He was offering everyone a lot of money for their land, but he was offering a lot more for your place. He was obsessed with that piece of land. He said it was the perfect location for a new subdivision. He said it was the key to the whole project. He was willing to do anything to get it. He even tried to bribe me to convince you to sell. He offered me a lot of money to be his middleman. I told him to go to hell, but he just laughed. He said he would get the land one way or another." My mind was racing. Jareth, the land developer, the man Maribel had warned me about, the man who had been obsessed with my land, the man who had been willing to do anything to get it. I had a feeling, a sickening feeling, that he had something to do with all of this. He had something to do with the eviction, with Lowell's betrayal, with the boat, with the locked box. He was the key to everything. I sat in silence, trying to process it all. Maribel had made a deal with this man, this monster. A secret deal to save our family from financial ruin. She had used the boat as collateral. She had given him something in return for the money. But what? What had she given him? I had a feeling that the answer was in the locked box. The box I couldn't open. The box that held the truth. The truth that had been hidden from me for so long. The truth that had cost me my home, my family, my life. I looked at Cassidy, a man who had always been a rock in my life, and I felt a wave of gratitude. He had given me a place to stay, a beer and the truth. He had given me something to fight for. He had given me hope. But the hope was short-lived. "Oswin," he said, his voice a low, concerned sound. "There's something else. I saw Lowell a few years ago. He was asking me about the land. He was asking me about Jareth. He was asking me about the deal with your family. He was asking me about everything. He was obsessed with it. He was obsessed with the idea that you had sold out the family farm. He was obsessed with the idea that you had squandered the money." My heart sank. Lowell. He had known all along. He had known about the deal with Jareth. He had known about the secret. He had known about the betrayal. He had been planning this for years. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike. He had been waiting for the moment when he could finally get his revenge. He had been waiting for the moment when he could finally get his hands on the money he thought was his. He had been waiting for the moment when he could finally get his hands on the land he thought was rightfully his. He was no longer a stranger. He was an enemy, a man who had been planning my demise for years. I had to confront him. I had to confront him and find out the truth. I had to confront him and find out why he had betrayed me. I had to confront him and find out what he had done. I had to find out what he had done to my life. I had to find out what he had done to my wife. I had to find out what he had done to my family. I had to find out what he had done to me, the kind of place that a man with $61 million would eat at. I sat at a table in the corner, a cup of coffee in front of me, and watched the door. I had called Lowell, told him I needed to talk. He had reluctantly agreed, his voice a tight, controlled sound. He walked in a few moments later, his new suit a sharp contrast to the worn-out jeans and flannel I was wearing. He didn't look at me, just sat down across from me, his eyes scanning the room, as if looking for a way out. "What do you want, Dad?" he asked, his voice a low, impatient sound. I took a deep breath. "I want to know what you did," I said. "I want to know why you betrayed me. I want to know why you threw me out of my own home." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I didn't betray you, Dad," he said. "I just took what was rightfully mine. You squandered all the money Mom left us. I had to do something." My heart sank. He had known about the money. He had known about the secret. He had known about the betrayal. He had been planning this for years. "What money?" I asked, my voice a low, trembling sound. "What are you talking about?" He laughed again, a sound of pure contempt. "Don't play dumb, Dad," he said. "The money from the land. The money you got from selling the land to Jareth. The money you squandered away on that old boat and on Mom's endless hospital bills. The money you were supposed to use to take care of us. I had to do something. I had to take what was mine. I had to protect myself. I had to protect my family." My mind was reeling. The land, Jareth, the money. He thought I had sold the land. He thought I had squandered the money. He thought I had betrayed him. I looked at him, at the stranger who had replaced my son, and I felt a wave of sadness so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. He didn't understand. He had no idea what had happened. He had no idea what Maribel had done. He had no idea about the secret. He had no idea about the locked box. He had no idea about the truth. "Lowell," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I didn't sell the land. I didn't get any money from Jareth. I don't know what you're talking about." He just shook his head, a look of pure exasperation on his face. "Don't lie, Dad," he said. "I know everything. I found the papers. I found the bank statements. I know you sold the land. I know you got the money. I know you squandered it away." He was so certain, so convinced that for a moment I almost believed him. But I knew the truth. I knew what Maribel had done. I knew what she had told me. I knew that there was a secret that was hidden from me for a reason, a secret that had been kept from him for a reason, a secret that was now the cause of our betrayal. I looked at him, and I knew that he was a man who had been living with a lie for years, a lie that he had created himself, a lie that he had used to justify his betrayal, a lie that had cost me my home, my family, my life. "Lowell," I said, my voice a low whisper, "you don't know the whole story. You don't know what really happened. There's a secret that Maribel kept from you, to protect you, a secret that's in a locked box in the boat, a secret that will explain everything." He just laughed, a sound of pure ridicule. "A secret? A locked box? A boat? Dad, you're losing it. You're just trying to get out of this. You're just trying to make me feel guilty. Just sign the papers, old man, and move on with your life. You have a chance to start over, to start a new life, a life where you don't have to worry about anything, a life where you'll be taken care of, a life where you'll be happy." His words were like a knife twisting in the wound. He was telling me that I should be happy that he had betrayed me. He was telling me that I should be grateful that he had taken everything from me. He was telling me that I should be happy that he had thrown me out of my own home. I looked at him, at the stranger who had replaced my son, and I knew that there was nothing more to say. There was nothing more to do. There was no way to bridge the chasm between us. The chasm that had been created by a lie that had been living in his heart for years. I spent the next 2 days in the motel room, the locked box on the nightstand, and the pawnshop money, a dwindling pile of bills. I was running out of options. I was running out of time. I had to find a way to open the box. I had to find a way to find the truth. I had to find a way to prove that I wasn't the monster he thought I was. I was about to give up, to throw the box away and just walk into the night, when I remembered the conversation with Cassidy. He was a persistent son of a gun. He was obsessed with that land. He said it was the key to the whole project. I remembered the conversation with Maribel. "I've made a terrible mistake. I've been talking to Jareth. He's a monster." I was about to give up, to leave and never come back, when I remembered something Maribel had said. Something so simple, so mundane, that I had forgotten it. The last place you'd ever look. I had looked in the most obvious places, but the last place I would ever look was the place right under my nose. I looked at the floorboards of the cockpit, the old, worn wood. I had spent years sanding and painting them. but I had never looked under them. I took a crowbar I had found in the shed and pried up a section of the floor. The wood groaned in protest, a long, drawn-out sound. Underneath there was a small canvas bag. I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside there was a small, ornate key, a key made of gold and silver, a key that looked like something from a fantasy novel. I took it out of the bag, my fingers trembling as I held it. It was beautiful. It was a work of art. It was the key to the box. I felt a surge of hope, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I was so close. I was so close to the truth. I took the key and the box back to the motel room. I sat on the bed, the box on my lap, and looked at the key. It was a key, but it was also a symbol of Maribel's love, of her sacrifice, of her secret. I put the key in the lock, and it turned with a quiet click. I opened the box, my hands shaking. Inside, there was a small leather-bound journal, a journal I recognized. It was the journal Maribel had carried with her everywhere, the journal she had been so protective of, the journal she had kept from me. I opened it, my fingers tracing the letters of her handwriting. The pages were filled with a mix of entries, some in her handwriting, some in a strange coded script. I knew then that she had been trying to tell me something she couldn't say out loud, something she had to hide from me, to protect me. I spent the rest of the night deciphering the code, using the few clues I had. The code was a simple one, a simple substitution cipher. It took me a long time, but by morning I had it. The truth was in my hands, the truth that had been hidden from me for so long, the truth that had cost me my home, my family, my life. The journal told a story I couldn't believe. It was a story of a secret deal, a deal she had made with Jareth, a deal to save our family from financial ruin. The deal was simple. She would sign over the deed to the land in exchange for a large sum of money. The money was a loan that had to be paid back in a certain amount of time. If she didn't, the land would become his. She had kept the whole thing a secret from me, from Lowell, from everyone. She didn't want us to know. She didn't want us to worry. She didn't want us to be afraid. She just wanted to save us. She had been paying him back in small installments for years, but the illness had made it impossible. She had been trying to get the money back, to get the deed back, to get the land back. But Jareth had been too powerful. He had been a monster, and now he was a monster who owned my home. The journal also revealed that Lowell had a few years ago discovered the will and thought I had squandered the money, which is why he was so cold to me. The journal revealed that he had been in contact with Jareth and had tried to get the land back, but Jareth was too powerful. He had been a monster, and now he was a monster who owned my home. The journal ended with a note to me, a note to my son, a note that would change everything. The address in the journal led me to a small, unassuming house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where a retired man would live. The man who opened the door was an older man with a tired look in his eyes. He introduced himself as Oswin's past business associate. He had worked with Jareth for years, and he had been a witness to the whole sordid affair. I knew Maribel, he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound. She was a good woman. She was just trying to do the right thing. He led me inside, and we sat in his living room, a room filled with old books and old memories. She came to me a few years ago, he said, with a proposition. She had discovered that her life insurance policy had expired a while back, and she was in a panic. She didn't want you to know. She didn't want you to worry. She just wanted to save you. She had heard that Jareth was buying up land in the area, and she had a feeling he would be interested in your land. He told me the whole story. The secret meetings, the hushed phone calls, the secret deal. Maribel had made a deal with Jareth. A deal that would save our family from financial ruin, but a deal that would cost us our home. She had given him a down payment on the land, and in return he had given her a large sum of money. The money was a loan that had to be paid back in a certain amount of time. If she didn't, the land would become his. She had been paying him back in small installments for years, but the illness had made it impossible. She was so worried, Oswin, he said, his voice filled with a quiet sadness. She was so afraid that she would die before she could pay him back. She was so afraid that you would lose your home. She was so afraid that she had betrayed you. I felt a wave of grief wash over me, a grief so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. Maribel had done all this to save me, to save our family. She had carried this burden alone, in silence, in secret. She had sacrificed everything for me, for us. And then he told me the rest of the story. The part about Lowell. Lowell came to me a few years ago, he said, his voice a low, concerned sound. He had found some of the papers, some of the bank statements. He thought you had sold the land, you had squandered the money. He was so angry, he was so convinced that you had betrayed him. I tried to tell him the truth, but he wouldn't listen. He was so full of anger, so full of resentment. He had been living with that lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He thought you had betrayed him, and he was determined to get his revenge. He was determined to get his hands on the money he thought was his. He was determined to get his hands on the land he thought was rightfully his. My heart sank. Lowell had known all along. He had known about the deal with Jareth. He had known about the secret. He had known about the betrayal. He had been planning this for years. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike. He had been waiting for the moment when he could finally get his revenge. I sat in silence, trying to process it all. Maribel had done all this to save us. She had carried this burden alone, in silence, in secret, and Lowell had misunderstood it all. He had thought I was the one who had betrayed him. He had thought I was the one who had squandered the money. He had thought I was the one who had thrown away our family's future. He had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been consumed by anger, a man who had been consumed by resentment. He was a man who had been consumed by a lie, and now he was a man who had betrayed his own father, a man who had thrown him out of his own home. He was a man who had betrayed his own family. The associate looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet sympathy. Oswin, he said, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. I should have told you what was happening. I should have told you what your son had done. I should have told you the truth. But I couldn't. I was a part of the deal. I was a part of the secret. I was a part of the lie. I looked at him, and I knew that he was a good man who had been caught in a web of lies and deceit. A man who had been caught in a web of secrets and betrayal. A man who had been caught in a web of love and sacrifice. I left the associate's house in a daze, the journal clutched in my hand. The rain had stopped, but the world seemed to be a different place. The air felt cleaner, the colors were brighter, the sounds were clearer. I felt like a man who had been walking in a fog for years, and had finally found his way out. The truth was a painful one, but it was also a liberating one. I finally understood everything. I understood Maribel's last words. I understood the strange conversations. I understood the boat, the locked box, the secret compartment. I understood why Lowell had been so angry, so cold, so distant. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster, and I was the one who had to save him. I was the one who had to show him the truth. I was the one who had to save my son. I went back to the shed, the boat a silent sentinel in the dark. I climbed inside, my fingers tracing the outline of the old steering wheel, and I looked at the hidden compartment. The boat was not just a symbol of our love. It was a physical representation of Maribel's sacrifice. It was the place where she had hidden the truth. It was the place where she had left me a message. It was the place where she had left me a key. I looked at the boat, and I saw it for what it was. It wasn't just an old boat. It was a legal artifact, a key piece of evidence. The deed to the land had been transferred to Jareth, but the boat, a physical representation of the collateral, was still in my name. The boat was the key to everything. It was the one thing that had been hidden from Jareth, the one thing he didn't know about, the one thing that could save me, the one thing that could save my son. I spent the next few hours meticulously examining the boat, my fingers searching every nook and cranny. I found a small, hidden compartment in the hull, a compartment I had never noticed before. Inside there was a small canvas bag. I opened it, my heart pounding in my chest. Inside there was a small, ornate key, a key made of gold and silver, a key that looked like something from a fantasy novel. I took it out of the bag, my fingers trembling as I held it. It was beautiful. It was a work of art. It was the key to the box. I felt a surge of hope, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I was so close. I was so close to the truth. I found more documents, more papers, more evidence of the deal. The boat wasn't just collateral. It was a witness to the whole sordid affair. It was the one thing that could prove that Maribel had been trying to do the right thing. It was the one thing that could prove that I wasn't the monster Lowell thought I was. It was the one thing that could save my son. I sat in the boat, the documents in my lap, and I read them all. The letters, the receipts, the bank statements. It was all there. A paper trail that led straight to Jareth. A paper trail that proved that he had been a monster. A paper trail that proved that Maribel had been a hero. A paper trail that proved that Lowell was a fool. I felt a pang of sadness for my son. He had been so convinced that I had betrayed him, so convinced that I was a monster, that he had become one himself. He had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal that he had become a pawn in Jareth's game. He had been a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. And now the truth was in my hands. The truth that could save him. The truth that could save our family. The truth that could save our lives. I looked at the documents, at the paper trail that had led me to this moment, and I knew that I had a choice to make. I could use this information to get my revenge. I could use this information to ruin Lowell, to ruin Jolene, to ruin Jareth. Or I could use this information to save my son. I could use this information to show him the truth. I could use this information to save our family. The choice was clear. I would save my son. I would save our family. I would save our lives. Lowell's downfall wasn't a slow, gentle fade. It was a sudden, violent implosion. The news reports came in, one after another, each one a hammer blow to the life he had built on a foundation of lies. His new business ventures, a series of high-risk investments, had collapsed. The money was gone, all $61 million of it. The public, who had once hailed him as a hometown hero, now called him a fool, a man who had squandered his fortune on a series of bad deals and a lavish lifestyle. The media hounded him, the reporters hounding him at every turn. They had a field day with his fall from grace. He was the poster child for what not to do with a lottery win, a man who had lost everything in a single catastrophic moment. But the worst was yet to come. Jolene, his wife, the one who had stood by him through everything, left him. She took a significant portion of what was left of the money, a prenuptial agreement that left him with nothing but the clothes on his back. The once gleaming mansion was now a hollow shell, the furniture gone, the art gone, the memories gone. It was a monument to his failure, a mausoleum for a life that was now over. I saw it all on the news, the blurry images of the reporters hounding him, the blurry images of the empty mansion, the blurry images of the police cars and the lawyers and the news reporters. I saw it all and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no joy, no sense of justice. Just a deep, profound sadness. He had done all this to himself. He had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal that he had lost everything. He had lost his family, his home, his money, his life. He was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he had become the monster he thought I was. I felt a pang of pity for him, a deep, profound sadness for the son I had lost, the son I had once known, the son I had once loved. He was no longer a stranger. He was a victim of his own lies, a victim of his own greed, a victim of his own ambition. I was at Cassidy's place when I saw the final report. The police had shown up at the empty mansion. They were there to serve him with papers. A lawsuit from a group of investors who had lost everything in his ventures. The reporters were there, a chaotic mob of people with cameras and microphones. They were all shouting questions at him, but he just stood there, his face a mask of grief and disbelief. He was a man who had lost everything, and he had nowhere to go. He had no one to turn to. He was alone. I felt a deep, profound sense of sorrow for him. He was a man who had had everything, and he had lost it all. He had lost his family, his home, his money, his life. He was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he had become a victim of his own lies. He was a man who had been consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal that he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He walked away from the house, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the flashing lights and the shouting reporters. He didn't look back. He just kept walking, his head down, his shoulders slumped. He was a man who had nothing left to lose. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. I looked at the television screen, at the small, solitary figure walking away from the chaos, and I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by and watch him fall. I couldn't just stand by and watch him lose everything. I had to save him. I had to show him the truth. I had to show him that I wasn't the monster he thought I was. I had to show him that I was still his father. I had to show him that I still loved him. I had to save my son. I had to save our family. I had to save our lives. I had to find him. I had to find him and show him the truth. I had to find him and show him that I was still there for him. I had to find him and show him that I was still his father. I walked through the streets of downtown, the cold night air a sharp contrast to the warmth of Cassidy's place. I was looking for him, for my son. I had no idea where he would be, but I had a feeling that I would find him, a feeling that I would find him and show him the truth. I walked for hours, the streets a blur of neon signs and empty sidewalks. The city was a ghost town, a place where people lived and died in silence, a place where people were consumed by their own secrets, their own lies, their own betrayals. I was about to give up, to go back to Cassidy's place and just wait. When I saw him, he was sitting on a bench in front of a bus stop, his shoulders slumped, his head in his hands. He was a small, solitary figure, a ghost in the city. He looked so small, so pathetic, so defeated. He was no longer the man with $61 million. He was just a man who had lost everything. He was just a boy who had been abandoned by his family. He was just my son. I walked toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. He didn't say anything, just stared at me, his face a mask of grief and disbelief. "Lowell," I said, my voice a low, trembling sound. He looked away, his face a mask of shame. "Go away, Dad," he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. "I don't want to talk to you." I sat down beside him, the cold concrete a shock to my bones. "I know everything, son," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I know about the journal. I know about the secret. I know about the betrayal. I know about the lie. I know about everything." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You don't know anything, Dad," he said. "You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've lost. You don't know what I've done." I looked at him, at the stranger who had replaced my son, and I felt a pang of sadness. He was still a boy who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills, the last of the pawnshop money. I put it on the bench between us. "It's not much," I said, "but it's enough for a meal. Enough for a night in a warm room. Enough to get you to the next day." He looked at the money, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and gratitude. "I can't take this, Dad," he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. "I can't. Not after what I did. Not after what I did to you. Not after what I did to Mom." I looked at him, and I knew that he was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. He didn't take the money. He just sat there, his head in his hands, his shoulders slumped. I sat beside him, the cold concrete a shock to my bones. And I waited. I waited for him to say something. I waited for him to do something. I waited for him to see the truth. I waited for him to see me. I waited for a long time. The city was silent, the cars a low hum in the distance. The streetlights cast a sickly yellow glow on the rain-slicked pavement. The world was a blur of neon signs and empty sidewalk. The world was a ghost town, a place where people lived and died in silence. The world was a place where people were consumed by their own secrets, their own lies, their own betrayals. The world was a place where people were consumed by their own grief, their own anger, their own shame. The world was a place where people were consumed by their own lives. My phone, an old flip phone I'd kept for emergencies, vibrated in the pocket of my worn-out jacket. I was at Cassidy's place, sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in my hand. The sun was shining, a warm, comforting light that had been absent from my life for so long. I had found a sense of peace in the quiet rhythm of Cassidy's life, a sense of calm that had been absent from my life for so long. The phone call was a jarring interruption, a rude awakening. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a feeling that I would know the voice on the other end of the line. I answered, my voice a low, cautious sound. "Hello?" I said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I was about to hang up when a voice answered, a voice that was both familiar and foreign, a voice that was filled with a mix of shame and desperation. "Dad?" the voice said. "It's Lowell." My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't speak. I just held the phone to my ear, my hand trembling. Dad, I'm sorry, he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I should have listened to you. I should have believed you. I should have known. His voice cracked, and I could hear the tears in his voice. I felt a pang of sadness for him, a deep, profound sorrow for the man who had lost everything. I've lost everything, Dad, he said. The money's gone. The house is gone. Jolene is gone. I have nothing left. I have nothing left but a series of lawsuits and a long, long road to ruin. I've been sleeping on a friend's couch. I've been eating out of a dumpster. I'm a mess, Dad. I'm a mess. I couldn't speak. I just listened, my heart breaking for him. He was a man who had had everything, and he had lost it all. He was a man who had been consumed by a lie, and he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. Dad, he said, his voice a low, pleading sound. I need your help. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve it. But I need your help. I need the boat. I need access to the boat. I need to get the documents. I need to get the deed. I need to get the title. I need to get the boat. I was silent for a long moment. Lowell, I said, my voice a low, trembling sound. What are you talking about? The boat? Why do you need the boat? He was silent for a long moment, and I could hear his shallow breathing on the other end of the line. Dad, please, he said, his voice a low, desperate sound. I can't explain everything on the phone, but I need the boat. I need access to the boat. I need the key. I need the key to the boat. My mind was racing. He didn't know about the journal. He didn't know about the truth. He just knew that the boat was the one thing I had left. The one thing that might be able to save him. The one thing that might be able to save our family. The one thing that might be able to save our lives. The one thing that might be able to save me. I took a deep breath. Where are you, son? I asked. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you at the shed. He told me where he was, and I told him I would be there in a few hours. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling as I held it. I looked at Cassidy, who had been watching me in silence, and he just nodded. Go, he said. Go and save your son. Go and save your family. Go and save your life. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, the cold night air a sharp contrast to the warmth of Cassidy's place. I was a man who had been betrayed by his son, a man who had been thrown out of his own home, a man who had lost everything, but I was also a man who had a second chance. A chance to save my son, a chance to save our family, a chance to save our lives. I walked toward the shed, toward the boat, toward the truth. I had a feeling that the truth would change everything. I had a feeling that the truth would finally set us free. I had a feeling that the truth would finally save us all. I had a feeling that the truth was waiting for me. I had a feeling that the truth was in the boat. The shed was quiet, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and aged wood. Lowell was there, standing in front of the boat, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked so small, so pathetic, so defeated. He was no longer the man with $61 million. He was just a boy who had been abandoned by his family. He was just my son. He didn't look at me, just stared at the boat, a silent sentinel in the dark. I walked toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. Lowell, I said, my voice a low, trembling sound. He didn't say anything, just stood there, his back to me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old rusted key. I'm here, son, I said. I'm here. I'm here to help you. He turned around, his eyes wide with surprise. Dad, he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve your help. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He was a man who had been consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. I walked toward him, my hand outstretched, the key a silent offering. He looked at the key, and then he looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and gratitude. He took the key, his fingers trembling as he held it. Thank you, Dad, he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. Thank you. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I looked at him, and I knew that he was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. Lowell, I said, my voice quiet, but firm. I know everything. I know about the journal. I know about the secret. I know about the betrayal. I know about the lie. I know about everything. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. You don't know anything, Dad, he said. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've lost. You don't know what I've done. I looked at him, at the stranger who had replaced my son, and I felt a pang of sadness. He was still a boy who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. The land, son, I said. The land, the money, the secret, the betrayal. It was all a lie. A lie you told yourself. A lie you believed. A lie that cost us everything. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. What are you talking about, Dad? He asked. What lie? I took a deep breath. Maribel didn't sell the land, I said. She didn't get any money from Jareth. She didn't betray us. She didn't betray you. She was trying to save us. She was trying to save you. She was trying to save our family. She was trying to save our lives. I told him everything. The secret deal, the loan, the illness, the sacrifice. I told him about the journal, about the key, about the truth. I told him about the boat, about the collateral, about the evidence. I told him about the lie, about his anger, about his resentment, about his betrayal. I told him about everything. He listened in silence, his face a mask of grief and disbelief. When I was done, he was silent for a long time. Dad, he said, his voice a low, trembling sound. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know. He was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now, he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. Lowell was there, standing in front of the boat, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped. He looked so small, so pathetic, so defeated. He was no longer the man with $61 million. He was just a boy who had been abandoned by his family. He was just my son. He didn't look at me, just stared at the boat, a silent sentinel in the dark. I walked toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. Lowell, I said, my voice a low, trembling sound. He didn't say anything, just stood there, his back to me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old rusted key. I'm here, son, I said. I'm here. I'm here to help you. He turned around, his eyes wide with surprise. Dad, he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve your help. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He was a man who had been consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now, he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. I walked toward him, my hand outstretched, the key a silent offering. He looked at the key, and then he looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and gratitude. He took the key, his fingers trembling as he held it. Thank you, Dad, he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. Thank you. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I looked at him, and I knew that he was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now, he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. Lowell, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I know everything. I know about the journal. I know about the secret. I know about the betrayal. I know about the lie. I know about everything. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. You don't know anything, Dad, he said. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've lost. You don't know what I've done. I looked at him, at the stranger who had replaced my son, and I felt a pang of sadness. He was still a boy who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. The land, son, I said. The land, the money, the secret, the betrayal. It was all a lie. A lie you told yourself. A lie you believed. A lie that cost us everything. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. What are you talking about, Dad? He asked. What lie? I took a deep breath. Maribel didn't sell the land, I said. She didn't get any money from Jareth. She didn't betray us. She didn't betray you. She was trying to save us. She was trying to save you. She was trying to save our family. She was trying to save our lives. I told him everything. The secret deal, the loan, the illness, the sacrifice. I told him about the journal, about the key, about the truth. I told him about the boat, about the collateral, about the evidence. I told him about the lie, about his anger, about his resentment, about his betrayal. I told him about everything. He listened in silence, his face a mask of grief and disbelief. When I was done, he was silent for a long time. Dad, he said, his voice a low, trembling sound. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know. He was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. He took the key, his fingers trembling as he held it. Thank you, Dad, he said, his voice a low, defeated sound. Thank you. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I looked at him, and I knew that he was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. I gave him the journal and the documents. Take it, son, I said. It's all here. The evidence, the truth. It's all in the boat. Use it to save yourself. Use it to pay off your debts. Use it to start over. He looked at the documents, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and gratitude. But Dad, he said, his voice a low, pleading, what about you? What about the boat? It's all you have left. I looked at him, and I smiled. A tired but genuine smile. Don't you worry about me, son, I said. I'll be fine. I've always been fine. He looked at me, and I knew that he was a man who had been living with a lie for so long that he couldn't see the truth. He was a man who had been so consumed by anger, by resentment, by a sense of betrayal, that he had become a monster. And now he was a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had been betrayed by his own son. He was a man who had been thrown out of his own home. He was a man who had lost everything. He was just my son. I walked away from the shed, my heart filled with a mix of grief and hope. I had lost my home, my family, my wife. But I had found my son. I had found my son, and I had saved him. I had shown him the truth. I had shown him that I wasn't the monster he thought I was. I had shown him that I was still his father. I had shown him that I still loved him. I had shown him that I would always be there for him. I walked through the quiet night, the sound of my footsteps a lonely echo in the dark. The city was a ghost town, a place where people lived and died in silence. The city was a place where people were consumed by their own secrets, their own lies, their own betrayal. But for a moment, the world felt a little less lonely. The world felt a little less dark. The world felt a little more full of hope. I had a secret of my own. A secret I had been keeping from everyone. A secret I had been keeping from myself. The boat in the shed wasn't the only boat I had. There was another one, a smaller, more humble vessel I had bought years ago. A vessel Maribel and I used to love. We had used to take it out on the lake on weekends, a small, quiet world of our own. I had kept it hidden, a secret hideaway, a place where I could go when the world got too loud, a place where I could go when I needed to remember. I walked toward the lake, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the warmth of my heart. I climbed inside the small, humble vessel, and I started the engine. The sound was a low, comforting hum that filled the silence. I was a man who had been betrayed by his son, a man who had been thrown out of his own home, a man who had lost everything. But I was also a man who had found his way back. I was a man who had found his way back to himself. I was a man who had found his way back to his life. I was a man who had found his way back to peace. I was a man who had found his way back to peace. I was a man who had found his way back to his son. I was a man who had found his way back to his life. I was a man who had found his way back to peace. I was a man who had found his way back to peace. I was a man who had found his way back to himself. I was a man who had found his way back to his life. I was a man who had found his way back to peace. I was a man who had found his way back to peace. I was a man who had found his way back to himself.